Truth and lie. One theme that stood out to me the most during my time in this course, and one that I still think about very often in my day-to-day life, is the existence of binaries in our society. After reading Pet, I have especially come to the realization that the way I view the world is very simplified. I like to organize things so that they're easy to categorize and make things simple for me to understand. However, this inevitably makes me organize things into binaries. There are many useful binaries that were explored in this course, and many that were also not as useful. Good and evil, lies versus truth, adults versus kids, me versus others. That is not to say that binaries are not useful at all in our day-to-day lives. In fact, I think it is quite the opposite. I think there are many binaries that are useful for me to acknowledge and be aware of. One of these binaries was explicitly shown in the book Pet to be the reason why they were able to find the monster. The binary which I am referring to is the seen versus unseen binary, which helped Jam to understand that there are things that she knew to be true, but there are also truths that are hidden in plain sight that she might not be aware of. An example of a binary that is not so useful, in my personal opinion, is the truth versus lie binary. I think the world is too complicated to be categorized into truths and lies. I think the truth versus lie binary should instead be a spectrum, because clearly there are things that are almost 100% true, but there are also things that can be said to be almost 100% lies. But most things in the world is a mix of a little bit of both. It is not very often, but when I do get into arguments with my friends, they might claim to be speaking the truth, but what they're saying to be true might contradict what I'm saying entirely. Sometimes there might exist two truths that can both contradict each other and at the same time coexist with each other. For me in my life, I have come to understand that when viewing the world in terms of truth and lie, viewing it through the lens of black and white in binaries will do you a great disservice. The world, as we have seen in the stories that we've read throughout this class so far, is too complicated and nuanced for such binaries. Child innocence. The topic of childhood innocence is a recurring topic that has sprung up in almost every module in the conversations we have in Discord. It's a topic that has so many viewpoints and arguments that I think it's fair to say that there's probably no correct way to view this issue. What are we allowed to show to children? What are we not allowed to show to? And why not? How mature are children really? How much do they know already that we don't know that they do? How do we treat children compared to how we treat adults? Should we be treating them any differently at all? These are important questions that have been discussed and talked about on Discord. I would like to reiterate once again that I don't think there's a definite answer to this topic, but I would like to give my opinion on it regardless. And you can feel free to disagree with me. The question being, are children inherently innocent? In my opinion, for the most part, I would say yes. I feel like there are certain things that should be censored when it comes to children because of their innocence. They are not ready for explicit adult themes in their media and in their story. Most children are way too naive and too young to understand many adult subjects. This is especially true for explicit sexual topics. I feel like there's a good reason why explicit sexual topics are not often present in modern children's literature. For me, it touches upon a theme and subjects that children are not ready to interact with in a healthy way. I think this comes from my belief that children in the first place should not partake in these activities. Things such as sex, masturbation, and other sexual behaviors are often censored from children because children are inherently innocent. This is just my opinion once again, but I think they should and could be spending time playing games, going to school and talking with their friends, and they don't need to be exposed to these explicitly sexual themes and topics in their literature. However, with that being said, I do think there is a difference between sexual education in media and sexual content for the sake of arousal. I think that the way that God Loves Hair handles sexual content is completely fine. It was informative and lets children know that what they may be going through is perfectly normal and part of life. Somewhat my opinion on the discussion regarding childhood innocence. Yes, I believe that children are innocent and should be swayed for explicitly adult content in literature, such as sexual topics that are for the sole sake of arousal. However, I think that sex education in children's literature is a-okay. Fairy tales. Out of all the modules we have explored during this class, one of my favorites was Module 3 and 4, Peter Pan, and more broadly the fairy tale genre as a whole. The reason I find these fairy tales so fascinating is that when I think of children's literature, I think of fairy tales and nursery rhymes. However, when I first read the origins of these fairy tales, I was taken aback by how gruesome and violent they were. Most of these fairy tales, like The Grandmother, which is the French version of the Little Red Riding Hood, also has some very weird sexual undertones. Certainly today, most of these stories would never pass as children's literature, but what I have learned from this course, from Module 1 and 2, is that the way we view children has been constantly evolving. From that of the working child to the sacred child, and this relates back to my previous item as well. Fairy tales have evolved over time in response to societal change to match the view of society. It makes sense that back then fairy tales in the past were much more violent in nature to the ones of today. We fundamentally do not view these children the same way as we viewed them before. It makes me wonder how children's literature today is evolving as well. I think we can see a good example of how children's literature is changing in God Loves Hair. God Loves Hair is targeted towards ages 12 and up. However, it contains some explicit themes and subjects that are normally reserved for only stories that are for adults. Perhaps we are in another age of transitioning in how we view and define children. It is possible that more children's books may feature similarly explicit topics in the books as well in the future, and that may become norm. Or perhaps children's literature may change towards becoming more protective of children and be even more child-friendly. I'm not sure which way it will go, but I'm certain that we are shifting once again, because if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that nothing stays the same in children's literature. Reflection. I'm going to choose 4 of the questions from the reflection to answer. A. What do you now know that you didn't know at the start of the term? There's a lot of ways I can answer this, but I think that the one thing that I didn't know at the start of the term is the history of children's literature. As someone who is deeply interested in all things history, I love filling the gaps of knowledge about history. The history of children's literature is something that I was not aware of before, but now I am. And I learned how to change from that of didacticism to that of entertainment. B. What was challenging, fun, or useful? For me, the most fun personally and very useful to me was the use of Discord. Discord is an app that I use regularly, so I was already very familiar with working with it, and I loved working and interacting with my peers on Discord and discussing and interacting with them in a safe and constructive environment. It's not very often that I get the opportunity to communicate with so many classmates and listen to so many interesting takes on lessons and readings. It is through my peers that I was able to learn even more and view certain topics in a different light. F. Did this class connect with any of your other courses? Well, as someone who is in education, this course directly relates to my other education courses that I've taken in the past and will take in the future. Throughout this entire course, when I was doing my reading and discussing ideas with my fellow peers, I was thinking in the back of my mind, how can I take what I've learned from the readings and discussions with my classmates and use it to further better myself as a future teacher? And one thing that could help me the most as a future educator that I learned from this class is that you should not limit your ideas to conform to that of society. It's okay to think outside of the box, and it's okay to stay safe within the box as well. Just be true to yourself and you'll be fine. Is there anything else you want to share about the class? I just want to say that I love how much freedom you trust and given us in the class. For me personally, I think it's the best thing about this class. This class has allowed me to just be myself and express my opinions and discuss my ideas with others in a safe environment. There's not many classes in the university that could truly allow you to express yourself as a student and as a thinker.